Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Places We'll Go show with Richie and myself, with a fabulous guest today in none other than Marc Nohr. Welcome, Marc.
Hello and welcome.
Fabulous to have you here today, Marc. I mean, it's been a big week, actually. You were made a Fellow of the Marketing Society, so it's been a cracking week. But let me build up towards that crowning moment. So Marc's actually had a fascinating career. I think you describe yourself as a creative entrepreneur and with a portfolio of roles, but man, you have packed it in. And in fact, I could take up this whole interview with the introduction. So I'm going to have to cherry pick, I'm afraid. You have founded and led multiple agencies, KitKat, Nohr, Digitas, Miramar. You've won over 130 awards, which is crazy. You've got multiple board and chair roles, Marketing Society, JW3, Stick and Twist, Until, Fold 7, 3 lifetime honorary fellowships, I guess now 4, or maybe 3. I mean, you could lose count on these things. And also you do executive coaching. And the bit that isn't in your bio, if people check you out, is that you're also a top-level Krav Maga. So for those who aren't aware of Krav Maga, think Jason Bourne-style fighting. So not to be trifled with, certainly down the dark alley. And then in and around that, I remember you being called out by Stephen Bartlett at MGGB as being his mentor. So how you bend time, I don't know. The other thing I would say is, what a thoroughly decent guy and talks a lot of sense. So here we are in the presence of greatness, and not least for the fellowship that you received this week. So fantastic to have you with us, Marc.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on yours as well. And it's nice to be with two lovely fellows.
You're very kind, Marc. You're very kind, but so accomplished. I mean, let's just kick off. I mean, how did it feel to be appointed Fellow of the Marketing Society earlier this week? It was a big moment. We were all there cheering you on. It was fantastic.
It was a great buzz. Actually, you know what? It's just a really, really good group of people. I mean, it feels like such a simple observation, but I've had my fair share of awards dues, as you would imagine from Marc's intro. I have to, by the way, credit all those creative awards to the teams that I led. I didn't win them single-handedly, but nevertheless, I've had a fair few evenings at awards dues. And the Marketing Society have created a culture, which, as you know, Richard, you're there. It's just full of thoroughly good people who have integrity, who work hard, who know how to enjoy themselves appropriately at a party. It was just a really good place to hang out. And so it was an evening of celebrations. One of them had my name on it, but all the other ones were fun as well.
Now, Sophie might be listening in, so I'm going to just remind you of the little conversation we had, this was the best of the lifetime honorary awards that you've received so far.
And it was the best of let me just get this right. Okay, you can edit out the wrong word. It was certainly the highest honor I've ever received.
Indeed. But you know, with a twinkle in your eye there, that you were enjoying yourself that night. And my sense is that you have somewhere along the way figured out all of these things, and our journeys and our careers are to be enjoyed. And we've not had this conversation, but it just strikes me that you always look like you're kind of enjoying it. So tell us about enjoyment in your life and career.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's a brilliant question. And I have to say, there was a moment where I probably didn't look like I was enjoying it, and someone pointed it out to me, and that was a massive gift. But I'll come back to that in a second and answer your question first, which is I feel blessed. I feel blessed to work in the industry that we, the three of us, work in. I didn't know I wanted to work in it. At school and university, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I wanted to be everything over the years that I was at school and college, from the conga player in Carlos Santana's band to Prime Minister, depending on when you caught me. So the notion that I would end up working in a career in advertising, who knew? But that's just the way it worked. There's something about the storytelling nature of advertising and marketing, something about its multidisciplinary nature, its multi-format nature. There was something about the variety of working in an agency, because you get to work with lots of clients, all those attributes. And I just loved every single minute of it. Still do enjoy it. I think it's an absolute honor to work in our industry, and it's endlessly fascinating. And it's also endlessly changing, which means that we have an opportunity to keep growing. Guess what? Growth opportunities don't stop, or at least they shouldn't. So I'm really pleased that it would appear that I enjoy it. But there was that little kind of moment that I just referred to. And it was a moment where in one of my CEO jobs, I was going through a period of pressure. And my then HR director who is a wonderful, wonderful, insightful and kind woman, said to me, Mark, I know you're really busy and I know you're having to pack in all of these responsibilities and you've got these extra responsibilities, but for most staff, they see you walking down corridors in and out of boardrooms. And when you come out of those boardrooms, you sometimes have a frown. So just bear in mind, that might be the only time that you're meeting those people. So maybe just look up and smile. And I thought, what a gift. What a gift. You know, I was showing the pressure, right? And that's not cool. It's okay to be human. And there are times when you go, you know what? This was a tough day. Bit of vulnerability is fine. You don't want to wear that pressure, you know, like a suit. So there you go. I also try to remember to smile and, you know, enjoy the to try and stop and smell the roses.
Yeah, I can certainly relate, and thanks for that, because I mean it's absolutely clear that all of us sometimes wear a little bit of a face mask on when it comes to hiding some of the real things that may be going on inside, and I think it's really good of us to kind of stop for a moment and reflect on actually not everything is ever going to be rosy, and there are those big pressure points. Certainly today, in today's context, a lot of stuff is happening, and I just wonder maybe if you could give us some insight about how do you cope with pressure, given the number of roles and situations you've been in, and you probably coach a lot of people who are under significant pressure. What are some of the advice would you give in that respect?
Well, you know, that there's this, I think it's become so well worn now, it's almost a cliche. This advice, you know, I think based on being a passenger in an aircraft, that when the oxygen masks drop first, you're encouraged to put your mask on first, because then you can't help your family. Almost a cliche now, but I think there's something about taking care of yourself that is really important, particularly as a leader. It's almost impossible to lead if you have, you know, if your energy is depleted and you're seeing your glass as half empty. As someone said to me recently, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I think it's always been really important to me to develop some rituals, and they have got more and more. I've evolved them. I've practiced them over time. And my rituals may be different to your rituals. I think Mark may have just been at a yoga session, if I heard that correctly. So for me, there are rituals around exercise. There are rituals around meditation. So kind of body, mind. There are rituals around diet. There are rituals around sleep. I nearly always attain, sometimes don't. There are rituals around gratitude, and you know, this comes from Taoist and Buddhist principles, that when we practice and appreciate the things and the people around us, we're more likely to value our lives and enjoy them. So there's a whole series of rituals that I've developed. I've worked with some incredible coaches who have rituals of their own, and I've kind of picked and learned from them. And I believe passionately, or fervently, I should say, in journaling. And so I don't just do that, but I journal it. And the first thing that I do in my journal is some kind of weather report, to borrow a phrase from the founder of Oxford Leadership, where I actually literally go through my own internal weather just to see how I'm doing. And if I'm missing one of those rituals, then I will undertake to recommit to it in the week that follows. Because guess what? You know, we all fall off the wagon, as it were. So, you know, maybe I intended to go to the gym X number of times this week, but it was a really busy week. So I'll reflect on that and I'll recommit to doing it next week. Or maybe, you know, I forgot to stop and appreciate the things that I really value because I was just too busy. So I'll stop and do it. I'll make a point of thinking about, you know, there was that conversation with Richie and Mark, and, you know, I enjoyed it. It was an hour out of my day, you know, that gave me inspiration and energy. So I'm gonna make a note of that as well. So that's how I personally do it. And, you know, the people I work with are probably sick of hearing it from me, because I'm always asking them, you know, to do that check-in and to look after themselves.
Amazing. I mean, that's some level of discipline. You're right about the yoga. One of the benefits of being more in a fruit salady portfolio world. But I mean, that is some level of discipline. And what came to mind when you were talking about that, Mark, is, you know, your amazing career has been, predicated on an environment of creating opportunity for creativity. So what is the relationship between discipline and creativity? Because at one level you could say they're not bedfellows, or you could say actually you need structure to create the context for creativity. I mean, I don't know, what's the relationship between discipline and creativity in your mind?
I mean, for me, an enormous one. I think that in the agency world, we talk about the freedom of a tight brief. I'm sure it's a phrase that you're both familiar with, and it's one that I believe in. I was in an environment recently working with a bunch of senior leaders. I'll keep it anonymous for obvious reasons, but the collective sort of consensus was at the end of a sort of period of working through something that in a sense the opportunity was too widely defined, and what we needed to do is be a bit more specific about it, because when everything is possible, like, where do you start? I also think that discipline is just important in terms of how you structure your time and give yourself the space. I mean, there's so many ways we can go, so many places we can go, guys, with this conversation. But let's just take a couple. Cal Newport's concept of deep work. This notion that we're spending the whole day kind of thin slicing, opening and closing our emails, responding to our text, multi-messages on multiple platforms. And the cognitive overload is something else, right? But you have to respond to your emails at least once or twice a day. You have to be alert to your text and who's trying to find you. So what do you do when you need a moment of creativity? Well, Cal Newport says there is a mode we get into that he refers to as deep work, where we need to go deep into the work and, if necessary, switch off all these devices. Now, whether it's your kind of classic Pomodoro technique where you've got your egg timer on your desk and you're focusing for short periods of time, or whether you're just saying, actually, for 2 hours every day or 3 hours every afternoon or whatever it might be, that's the time when I'm going to create. Now, whether creating for you is your podcast or your book or that report that you've got to write, that becomes a discipline. And I think we can learn a lot from people who are accomplished creatives. You look at authors, and I'm sure you'll both have observed when you read interviews with authors, and they'll say, I get up at 5 a.m. and I have that strong coffee, or I go for that walk, and between 6 a.m. and 11 a.m., that's when I write. And then I eat lunch and I sleep all afternoon, or whatever it might be. These people who are prolific have figured out that actually you can't do that 24 hours a day. You can't even do it 12, actually. I know there's a certain machismo with going, do you know how many hours I worked yesterday, without any reference at all to how productive they were. But if we're talking about creativity, we know that requires the right kind of fertile ground in which to flourish. And that requires focus, and it requires some of the other things that I just referred to. Also, I think, to carry on the creativity thing just for a second, a creative that I used to work with, director I used to work with, who said, when getting milk out of a cow, it's rather important to understand what to feed it. As in grass, you try and feed a cow other things, you may not get much milk out of them. And I think that for him was an analogy for creatives and the creative process. What do creatives need? They need a tight brief. They need the circumstances and conditions in which they can experiment, where it's okay, to come up with ideas that might be slightly ill-defined, but promising. They need, in the feedback from a client, for example, for the client not to kill all those ideas immediately, but to go, that's fascinating. It feels to me that there are lots of early stage ideas here, and then nurture them rather than kill them one by one. Encouragement, etc., etc. Lots of conditions that are required for creativity to flourish.
I think that's such a wonderful nugget of insight there, Mark, and one that perhaps is intuitive for the creative world, but what gets lost in the context of, like you say, busyness and bureaucracy and politics, and just the need for constant reinvention that we in marketing seem to always have our skates on for. What I really want to ask is, so phrases, words like discipline, specific, tight brief, structure have all sort of come through in this little segment. And I wonder to what extent these can be applied to career journey and career aspirations as well. Because what we've seen across our podcast is almost a polarization of some people saying they've had a very structured approach to their career versus ones who have had very chaotic ones or unplanned ones. And I'd love to get your take on, you've seen success yourself as well as in others. What do you think is the formula that marries up between structure and chaos in a career journey?
Wow. I mean, I think, Richie, there are probably as many ways of approaching your career as there are people. I am familiar with people who might have had a certain kind of education and training and decided even before university that this is what they wanted, and that they set about acquiring those skills, and they start as a junior and they climb the tree, and that's what they've done, and they're very happy in their retirement. I'm just not one of them. I can't relate to that way of thinking or working. We've got nothing but respect for people who have done that and who are kind of singular. So maybe it's got something to do with personality type. Maybe it's got something to do with opportunity, which is if you're lucky enough to be born into an environment where you're given those life choices and all the support that you need, then isn't that great that you've chosen to be that doctor or to be that marketing director or whatever it is that you've chosen? But I think for the majority of humanity, either because of their nature or because of the way that they problem solve, or the resources and the environment which they're brought up, or because of the way they problem solve. There's an amazing, a great book called Working Identity by an author called Herminia Ibarra. I think she's a business school professor. And she talks a little bit about how people develop and pivot their careers in the middle and later years. But I think there's a generalization there, even if we don't focus on the latter part of the career, but we start at the beginning. And she posits a whole bunch of things, but I think the most powerful idea is that she posits that when you don't know the answer, as in you don't know what you want to be, you didn't grow up going, I want to be an astronaut or a footballer or a doctor, then by definition, you can't work backwards from the answer. You can't say, okay, let's take the doctor example. Doctors have to have a certain qualifications. That means you're going to have to get the right A-levels to get into that college, which means that you've got to get the right GCSEs, etc. You don't know what you want to be, so how can you train for it? And the short answer is experimentation, by trying different things. And so certainly was the case for me, and I don't want to suggest that this is the case for anyone else, but I got exposure at a young age to lots of things. I was lucky. I got opportunities. I had people around me who were prepared to give me a try at things. I was an actor as a kid. I was a musician as a kid. I really wanted to be a writer at one point. You throw all of that together and some great educational opportunity to come out the other end going, you mean there's a career where people do all of these things together and it's called advertising? Wow, I'll give that a try. But even then, in my first role, I applied to be, rather embarrassingly, I applied to an agency to become an account manager or a copywriter. With the guy interviewing me, who was now my friend years later, who sort of pushed his glasses metaphorically down his nose and went, okay, well, which one do you want to apply for? And I said, well, I don't really know the difference. Can you explain it to me? I was lucky enough to get an opportunity where I could try different departments, in an agency until I figured out the role. Until I was promoted out all of them, and made an MD probably, and because I wasn't good enough at any one of them. But as you take that slightly more sort of experimental, which for me is another way of reframing chaos, by the way. And it could be a different story of the person that was amazing waiter in a cafe that became a waiter in a restaurant that became a maitre d' who realized that they can come cater for and understand people's needs. So they pivoted their career and now they're great at customer service and they're a client service director in a client environment or whatever. You could see how that route, took them there. I would say that's experimentation rather than chaos. But I hope we look at big corporates. For many years, my agency enjoyed servicing the Toyota business. Big, obviously impressive, one of the most successful, if not the most successful car company post-Second World War. And I noticed that my clients would be my clients for sort of 2 or 3 years, and then they'd be moved to another department. So a marketeer might have just been running a franchise operation. Wow. So, that's structural within, it's true of other organizations as well, that they build variety into their kind of career structures. And they probably also think that they produce more rounded professionals. I suspect that's why they do it. That by the time you're in marketing, if you've been through 2 or 3 other commercial departments, you're going to understand a thing or two about, about the car business. So I don't think there was a singular way of doing it. For me, it was experimentation. And for me, it's also become a bit of a life philosophy. I think that is the way to, if you take Herminia Ibarra's observation, which is when you don't know the job you want to be, you can't work backwards from it, right? So you have to experiment. I think, by the way, there's a corollary there for leadership in uncertain times. So, that popular phrase of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, etc. So what do you do if you're facing new and interesting competition from different areas? You're living in a time where there might be a huge economic uncertainty and all sorts of structural challenges, let alone technology. If you don't know what the outcome is, experiment, run a few experiments, iterate, learn very quickly, have a growth mindset, etc. So for me, it ties up with a kind of a bigger life philosophy that actually works.
Love that, Mark. Experimentation is a reframe of chaos, and there is no one way, which is liberating. Everyone has their own path. I'm going to flip subjects a bit. Big fan of Man U. I just watched you are.
Right. And you're not.
I could take it or leave it. It's the wrong shaped ball for me. But I did love the Beckham documentary.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of, Alex Ferguson and the hairdryer. And I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex Ferguson's got to be some kind of hero to you. Known for maintaining standards. People got ahead of themselves. He didn't mind dropping Roy Keane. He didn't mind saving David Beckham. What do you think you've learned from Alex Ferguson as a leader?
Oh, wow. I think he's probably a very different leader to me. He's considerably more successful for a start. The most successful Premiership manager to date, I think. And it is said that his character was forged in the sort of dockyards of Govan or whatever it was in Scotland. A tough upbringing, etc., etc. My father was quite like Alex Ferguson, but I didn't have that tough upbringing in the dockyards of Govan. But nevertheless, I think there are some enduring lessons. Certainly, an Alex Fergusonism, I'm not sure I'll be able to capture it word perfectly, was that has served me well over the times. Observes the following principle, which is, I think, when you can't figure out what the right decision to make is, make a decision and then make it right. There's a sort of simplicity to that. There's a multiplicity. If you're lucky, there's a multiplicity of options and choices you might have at any one moment. It's almost impossible to discern perfectly which of them is the right one, and therefore, on the balance of probabilities, take one and then do all you can to make it work, to make it right.
I love that philosophy, by the way, because too often, certainly in the startup, entrepreneurial, even VC world, people take multiple bets and think that actually it's that diversification which leads to success, but actually going deep in an issue, in a problem, giving it your all, actually is probably what leads to far more greater success in an endeavor than kind of skimming through and skimming on the top of each of them. But turning a little bit, maybe sticking with the theme of joining a few dots around football, tough upbringings, and the role that you play in helping young people find their way. So in your last answer there, you talked about people understanding what they wanted to be, and you named a few careers, and one that spiked my interest was, of course, someone who says they want to be a footballer. And that's quite typical of somebody who perhaps is coming from a disadvantaged background where they're not really exposed to a whole range of professional type careers in a tough upbringing, so to speak. And I really want to see how you reconcile it when you're talking to young people who maybe have come from those sort of backgrounds, and they do say they either want to become a YouTuber or an actor or a footballer. What sort of advice would you give somebody like that in trying to perhaps open their mindset to explore a whole range of other opportunities as well? And by the way, if it turns out they're the best footballer in the world, well, fantastic. But how would you approach that for a young person, perhaps in those shoes?
Listen, I think if someone's got their absolute heart set on one thing, then telling them not to do it probably will have the opposite effect, right? And look, there are people who are gifted and or have worked incredibly hard, and if that kid's waking up at 6 a.m. and knocking a ball about in the yard or in the street for 6 hours a day, maybe that's what they should back. Right? But I think there are phases in our lives and that we would do well to observe certain principles. And I think when you're in that, however we define a young person, whether at school or a school leaver or in their early 20s, wherever it might be, that it's got to be about maximizing inputs and learnings. It has to be, because you don't know what you don't know. To my earlier point, I didn't know there was a career called advertising, right? Until post-university, I met people who were working in different creative environments. How could you know? So sometimes what kids do is that they cleave to the familiar. They go, well, I know what a footballer is because, I love football. I know what a YouTuber is because I follow them. So that's the thing I want to do. And perhaps there's a way of saying, well, what is it about that you enjoy? What is it about that appeals to you? Oh, you like storytelling. You like whatever it might be, social media, or you like communications. Okay, now how do we get you to be, how do we get exposure for you to communications in the broadest sense of it? What else is it you can explore? So a broad diet I'm not an education expert, Richie, but I know that there's been this broad debate about whether the education system in this country gets too narrow too quickly, like for a bunch of GCSEs into a small number of A-levels into a singular degree versus the American system where you keep it open for much longer, right? But I think that there's potentially an analogy there that says, who says you've got to pick a career at like 17? I've got 3 sons. And my youngest son's 19. I've had this conversation with him before. It's like, Dad, I'm not sure I know what I want to be when I grow up. And I'm like, great, that's fantastic. Wouldn't it would be all right if you had decided, but you get to explore and you're lucky enough to go to college. So at college, like, do more than one subject, get involved in more than one activity. That of course, and it sits alongside getting a great education. It should be a laboratory, right? A laboratory of experience. So I think I would say to the aspiring footballer, YouTuber, or anything else, that's fantastic. It's great to have an ambition. Now, how can you learn as broadly as possible, both to make you the footballer or YouTuber you want to be, or indeed just to open the lens a little bit more widely and go, what is it that you can have exposure to?
Great lessons, great tips. Now then, Mark, you've had an amazing career. Life's not perfect. It's a bit squiggly. We all make cock-ups and have bang-ups along the way. What has been your best mistake?
What a great question. I have made a lot of mistakes over the years, / have had a lot of learnings. I made a success of some agency jobs. I don't think I made a success of all of them. Some of those experiences were quite tough. I sold my agency, the first one, Marc Nohr, to Publicists. I was on top of the world. I was at one point, there were discussions about me taking much bigger roles. Fast forward a few years and I was in the High Court suing. Never thought that would happen in a million years. One of the most challenging experiences of my life. So I could pick all sorts, but I'll just pick one from early in my career. Because I'm still making mistakes and learning, by the way. I'll pick one from early in my career that might just be a bit more useful. I had 2 mates. I was single, living in South London, trying to make my way in the agency game. I had a couple of mates that lived in my neck of the woods. And over a beer one evening, one of them decided that actually what we should all be doing is we should do a startup to try to think about how music and music consumption could evolve. And he had this notion that in future, we'd all be listening to music digitally. It was the CD age. So it's not like no one had heard of digital music, but he thought actually we might be listening to them on our phones. And he'd heard of this new thing called MP3. And I remember thinking, I have what is MP3? Is that a photocopier? Is that the name of the latest kind of Nikon camera? And so we set about creating a startup that would do personalized CDs. So maybe it's your partner's birthday and you know that she is a big fan of a certain band, and so you do them the greatest hits, or you actually think they're a fan of whatever it might be, Motown or a certain sound, or you can remember all their favorite tunes and you put them all on one CD and get it wrapped and personalized for them. In the old days, we'd go, what a great direct marketing idea. Now we're saying e-commerce idea. And so we set about doing it, and we created it, the 3 of us. And it worked, and we sold it to some big brands. It ended up being like a sales promotion thing, really. Buy the new Ericsson phone. This is the one we were very proud of. Buy the new Ericsson phone and you can get this personalized CD off the back of it. Not quite realizing in the future, you'd listen to music through that phone. There would be no CD. We even pivoted. We even managed to realize that CDs were probably life limited, and we should experiment with MP3s, as I've said. But in the dot-com crash, and we floated it on our FX, and I think at its height had a valuation of £60 million. We were all very excited by that. The main guy's name was Tim. I think he was lauded in Downing Street by Tony Blair. He was introduced as a sort of young entrepreneur when Blair did a drinks for the top 100 aspiring entrepreneurs. Tim went along to that. And we were all desperately excited. And then I remember going around and pitching it to VCs. Had no idea what our pitch was. I think we didn't have a clue how much money it was. We were probably like a bad turn on Dragon's Den. And we got rejected a lot as a result. Anyway, the dot-com crash happened. I don't think actually that's what did it for us, as it were. But the dot-com crash happened, around the turn of the century. And suddenly record companies who had allowed us to license their material, their IP, got very nervous because this thing called Napster came along. and people were ripping off music, and they just didn't know how to respond. They just started saying no. We got our 1-year deals, licenses with XYZ famous record company reduced to 6 months, or at one point 30 days. It was like, how can you operate? You got a license for a month. But they were just being told by head office, often in the States, stop licensing music, don't allow it to be to be licensed digitally. So anyway, the thing folded. I think we sold off the assets and closed it down. What a sobering education for all of us. And there was this eye-opening moment for me. Fast forward 10 years, roughly, might get the year about wrong, but Steve Jobs has passed away. Walter Isaacson has written that famous big fat Steve Jobs book. And I remember I'm on holiday, somewhere nice and warm, and 2 or 3 people in that hotel are reading that book. And I'm reading it too. It was the book people were reading that summer. Kind of long story short, I get to the chapter on iTunes. I didn't realize there'd be a chapter on iTunes, but why not, right? And I read how he did it, how he he had the software, the hardware, the distribution system, the branding. He was Steve Jobs. He walked into the record companies and he said, you are all, I think he used the swear word, which denoted that they weren't in a very good position. And there is only one solution to that, and that's to give us your entire catalog, right, without qualification, and give it to the iTunes platform. It was like, oh, that's how to do it. We were 3 kids from South London. We thought we could take on the world. Guess what? We couldn't. But I learned a whole bunch about startups, about pitching, about ambition, about the notion of us, developing the software, the hardware, the distribution system, and having the might to walk into the boardrooms in New York and make these threats to people. That was a bit above our pay grade. But I certainly learned some important lessons about how to do it and how not to, and hopefully, not too many people, lost their money on that transaction.
Mark, what a sobering story, and the heights and the roller coaster, the highs and lows of what it is in startup land. Relatable for sure. I mean, it's interesting because, what you described there was an absolute David Goliath moment in many ways, of course, in 2 points in time, and one reading through the art of a book versus the lived reality. But then thereafter, you see some incredible successes of startup entrepreneurs, and one that you've mentored in the past as well. And I just wonder, when you look at people like Stephen Bartlett, for example, what do you feel is the magic sauce that gets added on top, on the layers, to actually enable an entrepreneur to break through, whilst many others don't?
I mean, it's a great question, Rich, and I don't think there's a singular answer. I think the question that Napoleon asked of his generals, which was, are they lucky, probably plays in here. I think you do need a little bit of luck in life. If we talk about the individual that you just referred to, he had, and indeed still has, because he hasn't finished yet, this kind of inexorable, this relentless ambition to do it even bigger and even better, and to kind of break his own world records. And he backs himself, and he's prepared to think big and take some risks and accept that not everything will work. So I think there's a relentlessness. I'll pick that because I've got to pick something, and picking luck. And I'm not sure you can learn that much from just being lucky. There's a relentlessness. There's a kind of indefatigable quality that goes, this is a thing that I want, and I'm going to make it happen. Sometimes you do also know how to need to know when to quit in life. So being relentless is not always an absolute, but yeah, I think that kind of that steely resolve.
Can I jump in there for a second? Because I hear you, and I think personal characteristics of resilience are all absolutely major components of that process. If there was one reflection that I would have in the sort of the work that I've done, is that needs to be combined with some pretty hardcore technical capability around, and one thing that I think is critically important, of course, plenty of important components, but to call out one, is financial savviness. Is to truly understand, like you say, you're walking into those VC conversations, what is it that they're looking for, how to structure that financial sort of deal at the outset of the startup in the early days. And I think that's something that, passion can't buy in that sense. Relentless can't buy technical capability. And I think that's one thing that I would cling to very closely in this world as well, which I think I've seen separate some people from others in this regard.
Which I think is brilliant advice. And you're absolutely right. Financial savviness and technical ability. And look, it's one of the reasons why I think kids or young people shouldn't put themselves under pressure to be startup entrepreneurs aged 18. I mean, again, I'm not going to dissuade someone, but the notion that aged 18, when you've never worked anywhere, you're going to have that financial savviness and that technical ability. To your earlier point about what would your advice be, I'd still say go and learn. Yeah. I think Steve would probably be the first person to say, what did you learn back then? And did you have it all? He'd be the first person to go, no, I didn't have it all. This didn't work and that failed and I learned this lesson painfully. So I would say, you could save yourself a bit of pain, go and get a skill set. Just saying, it feels a bit old fashioned, but understand finance.
Yeah.
Develop a technical skill. And whereas we know not every entrepreneur is a technical genius, but they will certainly need, as a principle that was given to me prior to starting an agency by a well-known agency principal at the time, who said, young man, I think one day you should have your own agency, and would you like some advice? Which the answer was, yeah. And he said, find partners who are as different to you as you possibly can. So you don't have to do it on your own, right? If you've got the right team. But certainly not having the right team and also not having the right skill set, probably wouldn't.
There you go.
Probably wouldn't go for it.
What a great piece of advice, though, in terms of, ahead of time, in terms of appreciating the importance of diversity. Mark, it's goodbye, so it's last question time. And I'm just going to pick up what you talked about, Stephen, and his relentless ambition. You're still doing tons of amazing things, and I'm sure there's lots more to come. So what are you still ambitious for?
All sorts of things. I'm ambitious in the work sense, in the commercial sense. I'm ambitious for the not-for-profits or philanthropic organizations I'm involved in. And probably the best way of answering it by sharing with you my sort of philosophy, my why, if you like, which I only seized upon working 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe it was 3 or 4, but anyway, a small handful of years ago, doing some important work with Brian Bacon, who's the founder of Oxford Leadership, whose faculty I'm now a part of. We did some work together. I looked back over my entire career, trying and failing and sometimes succeeding in and around the creative industries, just to figure out what was that all about? Like, what was I doing? What gave me energy? What was me at my best? And concluded that the thing that mattered to me was creating new possibilities for myself and other people. And so I guess my broad answer to your question, Mark, is for as long as I get a chance and the world will let me create new opportunities for myself and for other people, then I'll be energized by it.
What a wonderful philosophy in that sense. And like you say, only came back to, that's probably taken decades in the making to consolidate that one sentence. It's incredible, when you think about it like that. It is a wonderful sentiment for us to finish on. So Mark, thank you. It's been wonderful. It truly has. It's been an honor to have you on here. So many great nuggets that I'm going to try and summarize into a few sentences. So bear with me while I try and do what I hope is justice, but probably just impossible to do so. You kicked off the segment here around talking about some of your life and lived experiences, but particularly the role of pressure and periods of pressure, and actually sometimes having to actually put on a little face, not to not be inauthentic, but also, you need to kind of shield people from that pressure in certain situations. Amazing to hear that you started your career really not knowing what it is that you wanted. Congo player to prime minister, really. But through the process of segmentation and perhaps understanding some of the kind of skills and areas that you wanted to play in, drafted or kind of cajoled your way into the advertising world, whether that be an account manager or a copywriter. But like you say, right, the fact that you were a generalist and probably not good at any of those things to expertise enabled you to become an MD, which I found quite funny. But there you are. But what's interesting? When you talk about the role of a leader and needing to wear your oxygen mask first, and some great advice that you helped us with in and around the rituals that you use to be able to give yourself that oxygen around exercise, meditation, diet, sleep, and above all, one I really love the most is gratitude. I think that's so important in life to have. What was great is the thought that not only do you internalize it, but you actually write it down. So you journal it and always make a little sense check of your internal weather as well. looking to reconnect and recommit to things that you may have missed out the previous weeks before. You put a lot of heat in the world of discipline, and Mark asked that question around discipline and creativity, whilst your response was have freedom for a tight brief, be specific, and actually create an environment in which you can allow creativity to shine. Create the space, egg timers, 2 hours a day, all of that. And particularly, the phrase you used was, when you're trying to get milk out of a cow, make sure you have the right circumstances and conditions or the inputs that are necessary to do that. A few more things that you talked around, and I'm pretty endless in that sense of so many things you shared, around the role of when personality does meet opportunity, and that you really do need to grasp things with both hands. But particularly when you said if someone doesn't know what they want to do, how on earth are they supposed to train for it? And that's the role of experimentation. We talked about leadership, leading in interesting times. And again, that links back to experimentation, growth mindset, iteration, having different phases in our lives as well. And the principles, what I really loved around the longing for learning and making maximum impact and gaining a broad diet of learnings, even though you may have a very clear vision and understanding of what it is you want to do, there is always ways to go to optimize that as well. And I guess finally, thank you for sharing a number of mistakes that you've had along the way. God, you could have been a very different person with those personalized CVs and had the .com crash not come. But life took you in great different directions. So you are relentless, but you're passionate, and you're above all just super humble. So it's just been, with that note, just been a tremendous opportunity to speak to you. And thank you for sharing so many insights.
It's been delightful. Thank you for your company.
Thank you, Mark.